Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling for a special interview with Chuck Yagla, two-time NCAA champion, won titles in 1975 and 1976 for the University of Iowa. And love to brag about this. You were the very first outstanding wrestler at the NCAA championships for Iowa. You did that in 1976, and then, of course, 1980 Olympian. And those Olympics did not take place, and we're going to talk about that with all that's going on right now with the NCAA championships across the board being canceled, most notably the Division I championships, where we could have set the all-time record up in the Twin Cities 40 years ago. And as we think about that, there was a political crisis where the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Jimmy Carter decided to pull the United States from the Olympics. But let's start from the beginning. Let's start maybe with January 1. At that point, I'm assuming you thought the Olympics were going to take place in Moscow.
Oh, definitely. January 1, I was ready to go and ready to win a gold medal in Moscow. That was the peak of my career. I was 26 years old. My goal was to win an Olympic gold medal, and the last 4 years, that's pretty much, my dream.
And training going into that, did you fully expect that the Olympic trials were going to take place? What was the timeline on knowing when that was going to get pulled?
Oh, the timeline was, I don't know the exact date. Sometime in late January, early February is when Jimmy Carter came out. And, of course, the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan, and he said if they don't withdraw their troops from Afghanistan, we're going to boycott the Olympics in Moscow. And that announcement was made, and everybody, I kind of thought, well, okay, that's interesting, but that didn't stop my training. I mean, I didn't think we'd ever truly boycott. So my training didn't even have a blip on the radar. I kept training like we were going to go, up until the very end.
And then when it did get canceled, do you remember what you felt, where you were, all of the surroundings when you knew that it was going to not take place?
When we finally realized it was not going to happen, I mean, we already had our trials. We went through, and I still made the United States Olympic team. We went forward with all that, thinking there might be a chance we'd go. But then when the realization finally came and the time hit where we weren't going to go, obviously it was a huge letdown. Back then in my mind, I thought maybe we were going to accomplish something by boycotting the Olympics. I had been to the Soviet Union twice before on trips, the 78 and 79, and knew what it was like over there compared to the United States. And I thought, well, maybe this is something that we can accomplish something. But obviously it didn't do anything except taint two Olympics and rob people from their dreams.
But they went ahead and had the Olympic trials to give you that Olympian status. So when you wrestled in the Olympic trials, you knew you were not going to get to go at that point. Is that right?
When we wrestled Olympic trials, they said we were not going to go. But in the back of my mind, I thought maybe there's an outside chance that something could change. They had said, no, yeah, we're not going to go. We're going to boycott. But I'm not. Maybe I was naive. I thought maybe there's an outside chance something could change at the very, the ninth hour or whatever you want to call it, the last minute. But no, it didn't change, obviously. And yes, they'd announced we're not going to go to the Olympics, but we still had the trials. We still went through that and had the, back then instead of you had best 2 out of 3 with 4 guys. You got down to the last 4 guys, and then it was 1 against 4, 2 against 3, then 1 against 3, 2 against 4. Until you got down to the winner. So we went through that whole process and that whole regiment of making the Olympic team over a 3-day period.
Did it feel different knowing that it wasn't an end game, that you were just going to maybe just be an Olympian? Did it feel like it was a different type of tournament?
It was definitely a different type of tournament, but it's so different now compared to what it was back then. I mean, there was no crowd, but I was also tried out for the 76 Olympic team, and there was no crowd, at the trials. It was, nowadays it's just totally different. So the atmosphere was no different to me than 76 because, we weren't used to having crowds for Olympic trials. But in my mind, for me to make the United States Olympic team, that was my number one goal. The next goal was to win a gold medal. So I accomplished my goal. I made the United States Olympic team. And to me, that's my biggest honor and, my biggest achievement in wrestling was making the United States Olympic team.
I want to talk about that with the no crowd. So when you had it, like absolutely no crowd, did it feel just like it was a tryout in a wrestling room? What did it feel like?
To me, it's, and I'm thinking back 40 years, and my memory isn't the greatest, but my recollection was it was like a tryout in a wrestling room. It was in I, my recollection a high school gym type atmosphere with some bleachers pulled out, and there were obviously some people there, but I think the people that were there weren't really spectators. They were just maybe some other family members and maybe some media. I don't know. I mean, none of my family members attended the final tryouts. It was out in New York. I think it was in Rochester, in my recollection. And it was like you had some mats rolled out, and you went out each day, and you had an opponent that day, and it was best 2 out of 3 with that opponent. Then you weighed in the next day, and same thing, best 2 out of 3, and for each weight class. And there were 10 weight classes back then, so it didn't take a long time.
Did it feel good to win it though?
Oh God, yes, it felt great to win it.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was awesome. The 3 guys I wrestled against, it was best 2 out of 3. 2 of them I pinned both matches, and the other one I won, I think 11-7, and had a pin. So I had the least amount of matches you could have, 6 matches, and 5 of them were pins, and the other was 11-7 decision. So I felt great. I accomplished what I set out to do.
You're one of the individuals on that team who never got another chance. So Randy Lewis made that team,
Yep.
but he came back and won in '84. You have Ben Peterson, who was on that team. He had already won an Olympic gold medal. But I think of Gene Mills. I think of you. I think of Lee Kemp.
Yep.
Now that it's 40 years later, what does it feel like to have that void in your life?
Well, for me, I get more bitter each year. It was something that was taken away from me. And like I said, at the time I thought maybe it was going to accomplish something. Well, it didn't. And as time goes on, it's a more bitter disappointment than it was 40 years ago. It's because I was robbed of something that, for political reasons, that a goal that I had set out to do and was not able to even come close to trying to accomplish because of political reasons.
The reason we had to cancel the NCAA championships in 2020 was a health concern. Is there anything comparable between the void of that and just a health concern? Because we don't know what's going to happen. We're still in the midst of it. But can you relate to what these athletes are feeling right now?
Well, there's definitely a lot of similarities. I can relate. I mean, they're getting robbed similarly of a chance, to become a national champion. So there's a lot of similarities, and I feel for them. I feel very sad for them. It's just one of those things that, again, you said it's health concerns. So it's life and death. Me not making or not getting competing in the Olympics wasn't life and death. It was political reasons. Well, we don't know what's going to happen with this virus, but and I was totally shocked and amazed that we didn't go ahead with the national championships, even with no crowd. Just but under the circumstances, who knows what's going to happen going forward. But I'm very saddened for him, and I can definitely relate because of my experience with the boycott.
Have you had conversations with Lee Kemp? In particular, you wrestled him in the finals in 1975 and beat him. You were prevented him from being a 4-timer.
Yep.
But have you had a conversation? Because he was a 3-time world champion at the apex of his career in 1980.
Yep.
What do you think he feels?
Oh, he's one of the ones that I think took it hardest of anybody. And it's one of those things. I'm good friends with him now. I don't really talk about it with him. I mean, we share sentiments, and and we communicate. I text him every once in a while, and we communicate through Facebook. So we've stayed in contact, obviously, and for him, I'm sure he's having similar memories that aren't good for the boycott from 40 years ago.
But you've gotten a few things retroactively. I think you got a couple gold medals that they gave you from Congress. Does that ease the pain at all?
It does. Since we boycotted, if people don't know, they invited the entire United States Olympic team to Washington, D.C. for 2 weeks, basically wined and dined us. The United States Congress approved to give us a gold medal to each athlete, and the United States Olympic Committee gave a gold medal to each athlete. So, I jokingly say the most I could have earned was one gold medal, but now from boycotting, I got 2 gold medals. Of course, I would have rather, had the opportunity to win one on the mat, but I have a congressional gold medal, which in people say that's one of the highest honors a civilian can receive is a congressional gold medal. So, that's something that I really cherish and am very proud that I have a congressional gold medal. And yes, that eases the pain, but still, obviously, would have rather won it on the mat.
1980 Olympics were going to be in Moscow. As you know, that's hard to win in that country. If you had to just give yourself an honest take, how do you think you would have performed in 1980?
You know, I'm one of those guys that, back then, I always felt like I performed my best when the stakes were the highest. Some tournaments here and there I didn't always win, but when everything was on the line and I had to be my best, I did good. And I think I would have won a gold medal, and obviously we don't know, we never will know, but I had success against the Soviet wrestlers, some not so good, others so good. So it was one of those things that, I think at that time I was at my peak. I was 26 years old. For an athlete, as a wrestler, that's the peak of your age to be the best physical condition you can be in. And I was in great shape. I was ready to go. And the ultimate winner of the gold medal was a Soviet wrestler, a Russian, that moved up from the weight class below me. And I was always big for my weight class. So I don't think I would have had any trouble with him because I would have been, in my mind, a size advantage. And the silver medalist was a Bulgarian that I had beat the year before in the World Championships by 10 points. I beat him 13-3. He won the silver medal. So in my mind, I would have had the gold medal.
Now that you have 40 years between that, what are you most proud of? You just said the 80 Olympics are what you're most proud of. Why is that? Just because it's the Olympic tag and you get to carry that with you?
Yes, for an amateur wrestler, the ultimate goal is to win an Olympic gold medal. So I got the next best thing. I made the United States Olympic team. And it's so incredibly hard to make an Olympic team. I mean, if you watch over the years all the different, sports and all the different athletes, just to make the United States Olympic team is a huge, huge deal and a huge honor. And so for me, that's part of it. It's my biggest accomplishment in my mind, but it's kind of funny. I tell people it's also my biggest disappointment, because I made the team, but then I didn't get to compete. So it's one of those things where I say, my biggest accomplishment at the same time is also my biggest disappointment, which is kind of weird.
Did you think about hanging around till 84 and trying out again?
I said I was 26 years old. I was married at a young age. At the time in 80, I had a 1-year-old daughter, raising a family, so I made up my mind I was going to retire after 80. So I did. I retired after 80, but then of course, a couple years went by and I got the bug to come out of retirement and try it again for 84. And unfortunately, I had a severe injury, the dislocation of my shoulder in a weird accident wrestling. So I was pretty much forced to retire then, before the actual tryouts in 84. So, had I not got injured, I think I would have made the 84 team. I think I would have gone to Los Angeles. I think I would have won a gold medal, but again, that was tainted because there was no communist countries there. So maybe all in all, it worked out, the way it did.
Message to these guys and gals that missed out on this opportunity. What's the lesson on all this, Chuck?
Oh, the lesson is, it's life. You have things that come up that you can't control the circumstances. I couldn't control the boycott. Obviously all these athletes now that they can't control what happened now. And it's a huge disappointment, but you have to just put it behind you and move forward and, get the next best thing for you.
You were a longtime official too, and you had to stay unbiased and you had to stay down the line. But I'm assuming the minute that you retired, you became a full-fledged Hawkeye fan, didn't you?
The minute I retired from officiating, yes, I became a full-fledged Hawkeye fan and cheer for them, and not just wrestling, all sports. I felt like as an official, obviously, I have to stay unbiased and can't show my favoritism for one school or the other. But the minute I retired, I became a full-fledged Hawkeye fan, and It's funny because I have a brother, a year and a half older than me, Steve. He noticed the difference after I retired, and he said, "Man, it looked like you had a lot of pin-up energy that you saved over the years that you could now cheer for the Hawkeyes full force." And that's what I do.
Looking toward next year, what do you think should happen? I know you have those opportunities maybe for a sixth year, some of these seniors. Do you think that's a possibility?
I think it's a possibility. I mean, I've been trying to keep up on some of the things that they've said. I mean, I've read some things that for the spring sports, they've already granted the athletes an option to have another year. I don't know if that's 100% true or not. And they're still trying to figure out what to do for the winter sports. You know, personally, I think they should have an opportunity to give them another year. But then that opens up a whole, lot of circumstances that are, a lot of complications, a lot of things going on with the scholarship limits and incoming freshmen that were going to maybe jump right in the lineup or maybe redshirt behind a guy and now maybe have to, be behind a guy for a couple of years. So, I mean, there's just so many variables and so many complications. But I still think for these athletes, the right thing to do is give them another year.
You remember where you were when you heard the news that the NCAA championships were getting canceled and how you felt?
The NCAA championships being canceled, it's been so weird. I've had a hard time wrapping my head around it. I don't remember the exact location I was probably at work, because I'm still working full time. But as each day went by, first they said, well, we're going to allow the championships to go on, but no fans. Okay, I had to wrap my arms around that. I thought, okay, well, we'll have a watch party because, this year I didn't go to the Big Tens because they were out in Rutgers. So I had a watch party with some friends where we streamed everything online, and that was a lot of fun. I mean, that's not what I had in mind to do for the national tournament. This would have been my 47th consecutive national tournament to attend. I've been to every one since my sophomore year in college when I competed in 1974. So, I was heartbroken because I wasn't going to be able to go, but I thought, well, no big deal. I can't go. If the athletes can still go and compete and I can watch it on TV or a computer or whatever, so be it. But then the next day or 2 days later, it came out that they canceled them altogether. And I was like, I was crushed. It's like, I'm still in my mind, I think I wake up in the night and I think, well, okay, we're getting ready to go to Minnesota in another week. And well, we're not going, it's like, it's just, for me, it's been mind boggling.
As we think about just the future and what's next and what could happen next year, winning an NCAA championship, you have two of those, and just the value in that and the value of that experience. How difficult is it to win that particular tournament?
Oh, again, to win an NCAA championship individual title is extremely difficult. I was fortunate to win twice. And like you said, I was outstanding wrestler, which is another huge honor for me. But, that is, such a difficult thing. It's so competitive. And I think even now it's more competitive than it was. And because all the athletes, I think they're all better. Every athlete you face is better than it was back in my day. Not that they weren't all good, but, it's each year goes by, it changes obviously. But, for me, that was another huge accomplishment. Right behind making the Olympic team, winning the NCAA title for me, was the next best, and the next hugest accomplishment for me. So, it's something that these guys dream of and work their tails off to get that opportunity. So, for next year, God, I hope everything gets back to normal and we can have an NCAA championship next year and keep going forward.
Chuck, appreciate you sharing your memories with us. It's been an interesting 40 years. 40 years ago, you missed out on the 1980 Olympics, and here 40 years later, we are missing out on the NCAA championships. Thanks for sharing that with us, and thanks for watching this special interview with Chuck Yagla, two-time NCAA champion and 1980 Olympian.